Grandmasters, it's Mike Amori. Welcome to the WCA video solution portion of the update. That's right, we're actually giving you the solutions to the end games in the video, and I do hope you solved them before you came here, because it was clearly marked in the blog that you do so. Those of you who came here first and kind of cheated, I know who you are. Yes, I do. I have a whole list. Anyway, turns out here white being down 2 pawns can actually draw this position. How cool is that? Because normally if you're down 2 pawns, you're busted, right? But not here. Turns out you can make a draw with this really cool move, King D5, not taking one of the pawns. By coming in between the 2 kings like this, or in opposition with the other king, black has a problem. What to do? They could try to make a run for it, and hopefully you guys saw all this stuff as you were solving it. That's not going to work. You must take the pawn. And when you do, the problem for black is, in order for them to win, and I do believe you guys know this, and right now I'm watching Rusa roll her eyes, because we have taught this position, I don't know, 200 times, and it's difficult to get the point across. In order to win this game, black has to be able to get to one of these 3 squares. And those are 3 squares that are, if you see it here, 2 boxes ahead of the pawn that's trying to queen. Those are called critical squares in king and pawn endings. And in the 4 o'clock class, most of you guys probably know this, but here's a little demonstration just to make sure that you get it, right? So what is black going to do? Well, black's going to play king c6. They're going to try to get to one of those 3 squares, and king d3, king b5, and you'll see after king c3, you don't let the black king penetrate, and their best move is to just push the pawn, because if they don't, you're going to blockade it. So when they push, step straight back, so that when the king tries to come in, you take very important opposition here. Pawn c3 check, king c2, best move king c4, and what to do here, straight back, king d3, and this is a very simple draw, right? All right, so let's go back to the drawing move, which is king d5. After king d5, what does black do besides making a run for it? So again, I showed you if they make a run for it, you just take it. They can try to set a little trap here, and they can play the move king c7, which gives you the option again of which pawn to take. It's extremely important that you take the pawn in front of the black king. So in this position, you have to take here on c5. If you take on e5, then what's going to happen is those 3 critical squares that I showed you are going to fall into black's hands. And it doesn't look like it's possible, because the black king is actually further away from this zone than the white king, but he's going to be able to get in by using opposition. As you get closer to the zone yourself, so does he, king d3, he plays this move king b4. And by doing that, you're kind of stuck, because he's threatening to grab one of the winning squares, and the only way you stop him from doing that is by playing king c2, and then he takes opposition, and when you take opposition, you get this ultimate battle for those 3 big squares. The problem is it's white's turn. White's going to have to move, and as soon as he moves, the black king's going to come in. Okay, so that's a pretty elementary position. So taking on e5 would lose the game in that position. So after king c7, just make sure that you take on c5, and there's no way for this black pawn to make progress. You're coming here next, and you're going to win the pawn. If he tries to make a run for it, you're in position to catch him. Okay, so going back, the solution was by putting your king in between the 2 pawns, you would draw the game. Now, let me go back to the original position for a minute here. This is how it starts, right? Well, what about taking the pawn? That always seemed a pretty natural thing to do, and I know some of you tried it. You won't admit it now, but I know you did. If you take the pawn, it turns out you're going to lose, because black is going to find this path to the critical squares. Very similar to what I just showed you in the other variation. You guys know what black's going to do, right? Yeah, king c4, game is over. Because after king c4, again, there are the critical squares. If you try this move, they try that move, they're going to get in and they win. All right, so king d5 actually draws, because whatever black does, you're going to take the pawn that he stands behind. So if he tried to come this way, you would take that pawn, and you have here an easy draw. It's easy now that you know the pattern. From the beginning, not so easy. You get this in time pressure, and you've never seen this before, my guess is you're going to lose. Okay, Grandmasters, so number 2 is exactly the same idea as number 1. So once you've learned that first pattern, you should be able to solve this. And it's all these cool in-between moves. That was kind of the theme of this week's puzzle series. And it's also all involving the end game. But you have to know these positions. I can't stress enough how important it is to know these, because once you know end games like this, think about every middle game that has a similar structure. You can make the argument that hiding inside your middle game is an end game that you understand. It's a huge advantage when you know this stuff. Okay, white to play and draw. If you know the original pattern from the last puzzle, this is actually easy. Oh, what? Yeah, push the pawn. You're going to make a queen. What does he do? He has to stop you from queening. He comes here, and how do you make a draw here? You need to get your king in between these two pawns. How? Simple, make a queen. I think he's going to take it, right? He takes it, king d6, and that's the same exact position we had, except even better because you're further up the board. You know, total draw. Okay, number 3. This pawn structure, I don't know how to describe it. It's like, I don't know, sort of like 2 triangles or arrowheads. I don't know. This is weird. But it happens so much in chess. Like, the more games you see this constantly. So it's a pretty good idea to know how to handle these structures and you know, figure out what's going on. In this position, it's white to play and win. But there was some traps here. You had to be a little bit careful. I mean, it's nothing crazy, but you had to be a little bit careful not to draw this game. The winning move is pretty straightforward. King c6, you attack one of their pawns. They attack one of yours. You take, they take. And now what? What to do? You hopefully found this in-between move, which is pretty thematic, right? This week you had to find this move, king b5, which forces a win. King goes to a3. You take the pawn that is standing ahead of the black king. You have to take this pawn, which protects your own. The king moves away. You play king b5, protecting both pawns, and you can see that that pawn, there's no way to stop it, and you win. Let me just go back here for a minute. Let's go back. So you attack, they attack. You take, they take. I don't have this in the notes, so you're going to hear a click of the mouse when I take this pawn. If you would have grabbed one of their pawns, for example here, so I have to click New Variation, they're going to take yours. And now what to do? This pawn is going to try to queen. Your pawn is going to try to queen. So you come here, maybe they come here. You run, they run, you run, they run, you run, they run. You know what's coming, but so is that. Check. Game is a draw. So you had to be a little bit careful here, okay? So again, king c6, king c3, king takes. What's the move? Little in-between move wins the game. Wherever black goes with his king, you take the pawn that's right above him. So, you know, again, if he took, I don't know, if he went here, then you take that pawn. Game is over. He moves away, you protect both pawns, and again, no way to stop that guy. Okay, Grandmasters, here is the same exact pawn structure. This time we're playing black, so the board was flipped, so don't kind of freak out and go, everything's upside down. Look at the letters and numbers on the board. You'll see that you're playing black, and your king is on the opposite side of the board. That happens so much in the end game, usually to support pawns and in rook endings, etc. Here, black had a cute win. It's really not complicated. Once you learn this stuff, it becomes pretty simple. If you don't know it, you're just going to play random moves. So make sure you guys understand the ideas of how this stuff worked. In this position, the winning move was king c1. White really can't move this pawn on b3 because you could just take it, and that's bad. Then you'll have a protected passed pawn, and that's an easy win, right? So what does white do? The only other move is to play king a2, and then you kind of force white into moving one of his pawns by stalemating his king. And that's a concept that creates zugzwang all the time. What? Zugzwang? You guys know that word? Amazing. King b1. I love that word. I want to get t-shirts printed that say zugzwang on them, just to see people's faces, you know? Like you're hanging out, having coffee somewhere, while you guys maybe milkshakes. I don't know. Somebody says, oh, what does that mean? You'd have to explain it. Anyway, king b1. See what you just did? You stalemated the king, not the game. You're going to force this little pawn to move. Poor guy has to walk into this, you know, wall of doom. And you just take the pawn check. It's not stalemate because the king can move or move his other pawn. And then you just kind of bounce your king around. Again, if he ever pushes this pawn, you just take it, and then you're up 2 pawns. And king a2, just walk your king up. King a1, and then you're going to clean up the other pawn, and even I can win this up 2 pawns, right? Okay, Grandmasters, hope you got it. Okay, WCA students, here comes the final and most difficult problem of them all. But this was really cool, I thought. This is the end of it, and this was from a Grandmaster game. I mean, this particular position has probably occurred in thousands of games. Most masters obviously are going to resign here, but Maroczy, who's known for lots of opening variations, was playing Frank Marshall. Frank Marshall had black here. So these are 2 top GMs back in the day. Why don't they resign here? Well, it turns out that the knight pawn, whenever you're trying to turn a knight pawn into a queen, and you're black again, remember, see the 7 and 8, no yelling. It turns out knight pawns can be the trickiest to queen, because when you have your king on this square, it's an automatic win, but you have to know this little maneuver: king f2, king h1, king g3, allowing white to take opposition, and then you just go to the other side, and you can calculate from here how simple it is. If the king steps out, you step in with your king. If he comes to the corner, you just push the pawn. When he comes back here, he'll be where he is now. You push the pawn to g2 and you squeeze him out, right? But it turns out here, like, king f2 is the right move, right? Let's go back. You have absolutely no idea how many people in this position play a move like g3, check, and then after king h1, the game's a draw. How sad is that? What does black do? You move the king and it's stalemate, and any other move, for example, if you push the pawn, let me just click it, here, it's a draw. You know, the pawn is being attacked, and that's a stalemate, right? So g3 check, king h1 is a huge mistake. It's actually a draw. So I wanted to start the problem with that just to show you why black didn't resign. And let's go back to the beginning. This is what you saw. I don't know how far you got with this, how much time you put into it, but this was an absolutely incredible position. There's so much to learn here, and that's why I said in the notes that if you could actually work this out yourself, you're on your way to becoming a master. There was a lot of subtlety here, and there were some little tricks along the way. So Marshall found this amazing idea of knight takes b3. And you're pretty much forced to take that knight. If you don't, I mean, I don't know, what do you do? If you play, you can't play king c2, because then I just trade knights with you, king takes, and then come in with my king, and it's over. I mean, this pawn's going to run, I'm going to grab this guy, and these 2 over here aren't going anywhere, right? So that completely loses. So what else do you do? If you try to, probably your best with black, with white rather, is to play knight f3. One other idea, by the way, you could try to run with your pawn, but I just check your king. This is really cool. So I give you a pawn. You take it with your knight, and then I have this nice knight c5 check, and that drives your king away from the knight. So I'm going to win your knight now, come in, and in this variation I have an extra knight, and that's pretty easy to win, right? So if I'm not going to take your knight from the original after you grab this guy here, my best is probably to play knight f3, but again, c4 check, the king goes away, knight c5, just retreating. Look at the control of these squares that black has. This guy really isn't going anywhere for white. What do you do with your knight? I mean, if you're white, you can try to come here and then just check. You know, you move your king in, and then, you know, I hit the knight again with the pawn, and you can't stop these guys. You're going to lose the game. So after knight takes b3, it's a temporary sacrifice. Moroxi had to take, and then the fork, c4, makes the king go to c2, pawn takes, king takes. So when you get good at this stuff, you should be able to see this position in your head from here. And it's really not that hard. Just calculate it. Knight takes pawn, knight takes knight. Fork the king and the knight. King moves away, take the knight. King takes the pawn. Should look like this in your mind. Okay? Pretty cool position. Here, after takes, the king really has to take the pawn. If you don't take the pawn, for example, and just try to get cute because you're thinking you have this guy that can run, then black just penetrates, and if you try to run, they're going to push first, and what to do? This pawn is a lot faster than this guy, so, you know, if you back up your king, we don't even have to come after this guy. Well, we can actually. What am I saying? Just come after it, and now what? If you run, we take, and this is a cool position. Another thing to, another little position to know is anytime you have split pawns like this and they get attacked, whichever one gets attacked, push the opposite one, and then you kind of create this little barrier here, and you'll see that the white king cannot stop the pawn. That's pretty cool, right? So anyway, let's go back. Knight takes, all forced. c4 check, king c2, take the horse, king takes, and now how to win. By playing king e4, you are giving yourself an opportunity to get these pawns if necessary while maintaining the threat of making a queen. And that looks a little scary because in this position you have a runaway pawn here as well, right? Well, you could have come to c5, and by coming to c5, that is what a lot of kids will do because they think, I'm going to protect my pawn, and at the same time, I'm going to be able to keep an eye on this guy. But watch what will happen. White will push, and what do you do now? If you go underneath your pawn, they're going to push again, and you come after the pawn. They're going to push again, chase your king down. Here comes their king. You take, they take, king b6, king e5, and guess what? You're going to lose the game. It's incredible. So what Marshall had to do after that original capture was find this move, king e4. And he calculated the whole thing out. There were some notes to this game, and it's pretty amazing how he saw all of this. So white is kind of stuck here. He knows making a straight run for it is too slow, so he comes in with his king because he has some tricks too. For him, in king and pawn endings, when you have an outside passed pawn, and that's what this guy is, usually that's enough to win because it forces the enemy king over to stop it. If you don't stop it from queening, obviously you could lose. The problem here for white, however, is black has a faster threat. So the white king had to be able to come in here to stop this guy. So by playing king c2, black now plays king e3. That will force the white king here. And you should have seen this in your analysis, because if you try to make a run for it with your pawn, and I do hope my mouse cursor is showing up, the problem is black's going to put their king here. and this pawn is running, and don't forget the first move it takes is going to be a check, winning a tempo, and then 2 moves later you have a queen. So white absolutely had to stop the move king e2. The only way to do that is to play king d1, right? Now, don't get caught by pushing this pawn too soon, because it's not going anywhere. It's blockaded. Once you push it, you're going to give the white pawn an opportunity to gain time and eventually try to queen. So what black did was king f3, allowing the pawn race to start. King takes, pawn races, and now it frees a second pass pawn. a6, f3, and I hope you guys saw all this. If you did, man, my hat's off to you, because this was not easy. a7, f2, and then a cool move, king e2, which you have to be careful, because you want to queen this, right? You see what happens if you play king g2 here, trying to support your pawn? This queens with a check, and it's all over but the crying. You lose, right? Very cool in between move. d3 check. King goes to d2. You make your queen. They make their queen. And then hopefully you saw that you had this really nice queen g2 check, which simultaneously attacks the new queen on a8. They better take. You take. King takes here. King g3. King e3. Snap off the pawn. And by the way, from the first solution, your king is already on one of the 3 critical squares. Here's the pawn that's trying to queen. Your king has to be 2 boxes ahead of it. King f3, g5, king g2, and now you have a typical win. Don't push the pawn, please. King g4, take opposition, give you those squares. King h2, king f3, king h3, give a check. King h2. Remember what to do here? Push the pawn and check, right? How many of you said yes? Yeah, I'm watching. King f2, king h1, and this is how we started. All right? Awesome job, guys. You're the best.